Alright guys, Dominic here for KitGuru, and today we are checking out the Aorus 16X laptop that was first announced back at CES 2024, and Leo even got hands-on with it briefly while he was out in Las Vegas. This machine is really aimed at gamers and content creators who want decent performance without spending thousands upon thousands of pounds. So for 1900 quid here in the UK, you get a 16-inch QHD plus 165Hz display, Intel's i9-4900HX CPU, RTX 4070 laptop graphics, 32 gigs of DDR5 memory, as well as 2 terabytes of NVMe storage. It certainly sounds good on paper, but in this video, we're going to put it through its paces and find out whether or not it's worth buying.
Unleash the power of RTX 4080 Super with superior liquid cooling.
We'll start things off then with a look at the design of the laptop, and I have to say Gigabyte kept things fairly understated with the Aorus 16X. The lid of the machine, for instance, is left almost completely bare, save for the Aorus logo and some branding in the upper corner, while you might also notice a very subtle bluish hint to the colour. Once turned on as well, there is some RGB lighting on the rear of the machine, but otherwise I'd say it's a fairly laid-back design. It's also relatively slender for a gaming machine, coming in at 27mm thick, and it weighs in at 2.3 kilos. The lid itself then is made of metal and feels pretty solid. There is only a small amount of flex if you put pressure on both corners, though we obviously don't recommend that. The inside deck and the underside are made from plastic, but I have to say still feel very solid with very little flex in the main body of the machine. Sure, it would have been nice to have an all-aluminium chassis like the MacBook Pro or the Razer Blade, but at this price point, I really don't think we can complain. Opening up the lid gives us a closer look at the keyboard, and you may immediately notice that the unit I have is a US layout with a half-height enter key, though Gigabyte does assure me that UK buyers will get an ISO layout, and that's the only difference between my sample and final retail models. The keyboard itself is fine, you don't get a ton of travel from the scissor switches, but it's about what we'd expect from a gaming laptop, and you can also control the RGB lighting using Gigabyte's Control Center software. I'd argue that the trackpad is even better to use, being nice and large but very smooth overall, and it has pretty satisfying buttons. I certainly wouldn't game on it, but for browsing the web or any general usage tasks, it is definitely more than good enough. A 1080p webcam also comes built into the top bezel, which isn't the best quality, but I'd say it's about acceptable for any video meetings you may have to sit through. Below that though, we find the star of the show being the 16-inch 2560 by 1600 display, which is a 16 by 10 aspect ratio, so you get that bit of extra vertical estate compared to a more typical 16 by 9 screen. Gigabyte doesn't specify what panel type this is, but it does appear to be an IPS type manufactured by BOE. Gigabyte only claims up to 400 nits, but I actually saw over 550 nits in my testing at 100% brightness, with a contrast ratio of 1321:1, which is pretty typical of modern IPS displays. Gamma did come in a bit below the claimed 100% sRGB coverage, however, as I saw 95% coverage in my tests. Grayscale performance is good though, with an average delta E of 2.81, though the colour balance is slightly cool, averaging 6116K. Gamma is also a touch high across the board, averaging 2.3, and while I couldn't find any option to tweak this, I did ask Gigabyte if this might be possible, so if I hear back, I'll be sure to leave a comment down below. Colour accuracy though is a strong point of the display, as we saw an average delta E of 2.71 and a maximum of 4.84, which indicates pretty decent factory calibration. For gaming as well, the 165Hz refresh rate delivers a fluid experience with decent response times on offer. Moving on then to talk about the I/O, this is all split between the left and the right hand sides of the laptop. Starting on the left hand side then, this is home to the power input, Ethernet, HDMI 2.1 video output, and one USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A port, and another Type C port that supports Thunderbolt 4, USB 4, DisplayPort 1.4, and Power Delivery 3.0. The right hand side features another two USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, one being Type A and the other Type C, and we also get a micro SD slot and a combo audio jack. I do think this is a decent selection overall. The two Type A ports is acceptable, I think, for a modern machine. My only real quibble is the micro SD card slot instead of the full-size SD card reader, which is a lot more common for video and photo work, but overall I think this is a healthy selection. Removing the bottom panel then to take a look at the internal layout, there are a few different points to note here. The first is the 99.2 watt-hour battery, and then we also get two M.2 SSDs. These are labelled AG450E, which indicates they are Aorus Gen 4 5000E drives, and there's a pair of 1TB units in this machine. We can also see the two 16GB DDR5 SODIMM modules from Samsung, rated at 5600 MHz, alongside an Intel BE200 Wi-Fi 7 M.2 card. Again, I have no real issues with the overall internal layout. The only thing I would point out is that both the M.2 and memory slots are already occupied, so if you do want to upgrade either the memory or the storage down the line, then that will mean replacing the existing hardware instead of simply just adding an extra module in. I don't think it's the end of the world, but it is definitely something to point out.
If you're looking for a new chair, then you should definitely check out Booley's. I'm currently sat on their Ninja Pro gaming chair, which is one of 3 models from their gaming series alongside the Elite and the Master. So if you're looking for something new to stick in your setup that you can sit on and game and work, then I recommend definitely checking out boolies.co.uk.
That's going to do it for our look at the design of the laptop then, and before we move on to talk about performance, it is worth just quickly going over Gigabyte's AI system that they've built into the Aorus 16X, as this essentially boils down to different modes which offer varying power limits for the CPU and GPU. The first stage then is choosing the power gear, which essentially gives you a choice between power saving, balanced or performance profiles, though do note enabling a new mode here does require a restart. The AI boost feature, however, is more interesting as this offers a bunch of different profiles that are tailored to different tasks. You can enable these manually, but if you simply engage the AI boost feature, this system will automatically switch profiles when it detects certain software being used. Cinebench, for instance, switched me over to the creator profile, while Cyberpunk 2077, of course, engaged the gaming profile. Personally, I do think calling this AI is somewhat of a stretch, but overall I do think it is at least a semi-useful system that will funnel more power to either the CPU or GPU depending on what you're doing. For my testing today then, I ended up with 3 different configurations. First of all, I tested using the balanced power gear mode with AI off, so this is the default out-of-the-box experience. I then tested again using the same balanced power gear mode, but this time with AI enabled, so we can see exactly what difference the AI boost feature makes. Finally, as a test of all-out performance, I used the performance power gear mode, but with the turbo profile manually selected, which enables the maximum power limits for both CPU and GPU, though at the cost of extreme noise levels, which we will get to very shortly. In terms of the actual operating behavior then of those 3 modes that I selected, starting off with the balanced power profile but with AI disabled, we saw the P-cores boost up to 3.6 to 3.7 GHz initially, with power around 120 watts. After 40 seconds, the power draw dropped to 85 to 95 watts, and the P-cores clocked in now at 3.2 to 3.3 GHz. In Cyberpunk 2077, the GPU clocked around 2370 MHz, with power draw reported at about 95 watts. The balanced power mode then, but with AI enabled, saw the P-cores boost to 3.9 to 4 GHz initially, with power draw around 135 watts. Again, after 40 seconds, the power did drop to about 110 watts, with P-cores now clocking at 3.5 to 3.6 GHz, so that's about 200 to 300 MHz faster than we saw with AI disabled. As for the GPU, this clocked in around 2565 MHz in Cyberpunk, with power draw reported at about 110 watts. Lastly then, for the performance power mode using the turbo profile, this saw the P-cores boost to 4 to 4.1 GHz initially, with power at 150 to 160 watts. After 40 seconds, the power dropped to about 120 watts, with the P-cores clocking at 3.7 to 3.8 GHz. In Cyberpunk, again, the GPU clocked in at 2565 MHz, with power reported at about 115 watts. Of course, the higher the power draw, the hotter the CPU will run, though outside of the initial 40-second boost period, things are kept relatively in check by the Aorus 16X. The AI gaming results hit 72 degrees in Cyberpunk and 81 degrees in Cinebench, for instance, while the turbo mode still only hit 87 degrees in Cinebench, which, for a CPU drawing about 120 watts sustained, really isn't too bad. Likewise, GPU thermals are fine regardless of the profile used. The results with AI off were the coolest due to the lower 95 watt power limit, but even at 115 watts we saw sub 80 degree temperatures on both the hotspot and the memory. Part of this thermal performance is undoubtedly down to the fan speed, however, which definitely gets pretty raucous. As the power draw increases, so too does fan speed, and we measured a 50 decibel reading using the AI creator profile. The turbo mode meanwhile puts fan speed up to maximum, which really is pretty unpleasant, hitting 53 decibels, but take a listen for yourself with this quick sound test. In terms of actual benchmark numbers then, as we'd expect in Cinebench multi-core, the higher the power, the better the score will be, with our turbo testing indicating performance can be improved by about 13% compared to the default out-of-the-box experience with AI turned off. The single-core testing though saw no real difference in performance, as the power limit has very little significance in this test. PC Mark X, however, did show the benefit of the higher power modes, with scores increasing every time we bumped up the profiles tested. Overall, the turbo mode is 10% faster than the results with no AI enabled. We also see the same performance scaling in 3D Mark Time Spy when looking at the CPU score, but interestingly, the turbo mode GPU score was slightly worse than the balanced with AI gaming result. This behaviour actually cropped up a few times in our game testing as well, and it appears to be down to the fact that the turbo mode can sometimes reduce GPU power and clocks compared to the AI gaming mode in exchange for higher CPU power. As for storage, the pair of Aorus Gen 4 5000 SSDs live up to their name here, with sequential reads hitting 5.2 GB a second, while sequential writes hit 4.8 GB per second. Both SSDs are the exact same model, so performance is identical between the two. Finally, I also tested battery life using the PC Mark X Modern Office test, using the balanced profile with no AI, and then again with the AI power saving mode engaged. That didn't actually make much difference, but both results still offered about 7 hours of battery life for light tasks, which I have to say I was pretty happy with considering the beefy hardware in this laptop. Moving on to our game benchmarks then, here I tested 5 different games at the native 2560 by 1600 resolution, or 2560 by 1440p in Returnal, which didn't seem to support the 16 by 10 aspect ratio. All testing was done using either high or ultra settings, but do note DLSS and ray tracing were disabled for these benchmarks. Putting the figures on screen for you now then, I have to say overall gaming performance is about as expected from the Aorus 16X. The RTX 4070 laptop GPU is more akin to the desktop 4060 Ti. It's not a super powerful GPU when gaming at the native 1440p plus resolution. It did, however, still deliver about 60 FPS in the 5 games we tested, but enabling DLSS or dropping down to 1920 by 1200 will definitely get you closer to the native 165Hz refresh rate of this display. As noted from our Time Spy testing as well, there are a few occasions where the turbo profile performs slightly worse than the AI gaming profile, due to the former mode's high CPU power draw, sometimes taking away from the GPU power budget on occasion, but this can vary from game to game. Finally, it's also just worth pointing out that the Aorus 16X does support NVIDIA Advanced Optimus technology, so it dynamically switches between the CPU's iGPU and the 4070D GPU without the user having to do anything, and no need for a system restart. So if you're gaming, it's automatically going to switch you over to the 4070D GPU. This also means that performance is identical whether you are using the built-in laptop screen or if you've hooked it up to an external display, which can't always be said for laptops which don't have a mux switch built in. Wrapping up this review then, I have to say I really like what Gigabyte has done here with the Aorus 16X. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's class leading in any one area, but it is very solid across the board, and overall, I kind of come away with the feeling that it's more than the sum of its parts, especially considering the £1,900 asking price. That comes down to the fact that we've got a fast flagship CPU from Intel, 32 gigs of DDR5 memory, 2 terabytes of PCIe Gen 4 storage, a Wi-Fi 7 module, plus a pretty decent collection of ports and connectors. I'd also argue that the display is probably the biggest highlight here, offering fast and fluid gaming experiences, but with solid contrast, surprisingly high peak brightness of over 550 nits, alongside impressive color accuracy. I also love the fact that it's a 1440p plus resolution, 2560 by 1600, when considering many other machines of this class are still only offering full HD screens. This is really good to see with the Aorus 16X. As for the complaints though, my main one does have to come down to the RTX 4070 laptop GPU and the fact it only has an 8GB frame buffer, which will be a limiting factor depending on the type of games you play. I have talked about video memory a ton in my GPU reviews this year, though I don't think it's quite as critical in a laptop, given anyone buying one of these machines will have to expect some compromise due to the very nature of a portable gaming laptop. Plus, the smaller screen also means you can get away with lower image quality without it being as obvious as it would be on, say, a 27-inch or 32-inch gaming monitor. I guess how big of an issue this will be ultimately depends on the type of gamer you are and what you want to do with this machine, but it's definitely something worth bearing in mind, particularly as RTX 4080 laptops with 12 gigs of VRAM actually only start at about £2,000, though typically those are lower end models with only 16 gigs of RAM and a full HD display, so that's already 2 compromises versus the Aorus 16X. My only other real complaint as well is the fact that the WindForce Infinity cooling setup does get very loud under load, as we already showed earlier in this video, but again I really do think that's part and parcel of a high performance gaming laptop. Overall, I do like the Aorus 16X, and at £1,900 I am sure this will appeal to a decent audience. Just let me know what you think about the VRAM situation down in the comments below. That is going to do it for this video though guys, so if you liked it, please do toss me a thumbs up, and as I said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and ding that notification bell so you don't miss when we upload a new video. And if you want to carry on the conversation, why not head over to our Discord server, which is linked in the description. While you're there, you can also find links to our merch store, and if you're feeling particularly generous, you could even consider backing us on Patreon. That's it for this one though guys, I'm Dominic for KitGuru, and I'll see you in the next video.